Hello, my name's Mary Monro and I'm a registered osteopath based in Edinburgh. What I'm going to talk about today is unsettled babies, what might be causing them to be unsettled, and what you can do about it at home to try and help your baby to feel more comfortable. So, first of all, what might be causing a baby to feel unsettled? Well, the basic things are things like being hungry or being tired or needing a nappy change or needing to be winded or just needing a cuddle. In the first few weeks after your baby's born, it can be really hard to distinguish which of those things might be causing the problem. But I'm sure you will find as the weeks go by that you learn to distinguish between a cry that means I'm hungry compared to a cry that means I'm tired or I need a nappy change. And you'll get more adept at recognizing those signals and then being able to respond to them. But there can be instances when babies are unsettled beyond those ordinary things. And so you need to think about what else might be causing them to feel unsettled. Obviously, if you have any health concerns, if they've got a temperature, if their breathing rate is different to normal, if there's any sign that they're really unwell, if they're very quiet actually, then obviously call your GP or call 111 and they can help you to decide whether your baby needs treatment or not. But if it's just a kind of ordinary day-to-day thing that they just seem to be unsettled a lot of the time, then it's worth thinking about what might be causing that discomfort. So, first of all, have a look at your baby in terms of, is there any obvious sign of something that might be causing them discomfort? Have they got a rash, perhaps, or is there anything that seems to be uncomfortable? So try, for example, moving their arms and legs individually, each limb individually, and just see if anything causes discomfort when their limb is being moved. Similarly, turn their head both directions to see if when they turn their head it seems to set off any kind of crying that might indicate that there's a bit of discomfort in their neck, for example. Similarly, think about looking at their head quite carefully. So perhaps when you're bathing them or when they're on the changing mat or something like that, just have a look at the head and the bones of the skull and just see if there's any indication that there's any sort of discomfort there potentially. One of the things that can happen when a baby is born, particularly if there's been a long labour or a lot of compression, perhaps as a result of an induced labour, for example, you might notice that the skull bones are a little bit squashed. I'm just going to show you an infant's skull now, just to warn you there's a little skull coming up. So if we have a look at this skull, you can see on the top here, that's the fontanelle, which is the soft spot between the bones of the skull where they don't actually quite meet up. And then I've just marked up that these are the suture lines. So this is the sagittal suture that runs all the way back from front to back over the skull. And this is the coronal suture that runs across the skull. And what you can notice sometimes is that instead of meeting like that, they just overlap slightly like that or like that. And that can indicate that they got a bit squashed on the way out. I'm going to come back to what you can do about that in a moment, but let's just concentrate on noticing how your baby is. You can also have a look at the back of the skull. So this is the back of the infant skull, and this suture here, again, you might see some overlap between that and the skull bones on the side of the head. So just notice if there's any lumps or bumps or ridges or anything like that that could potentially be causing your baby a little bit of discomfort. Another thing to think about is whether the timing of your baby's crying episodes has to do with feeds. So, for example, if your baby seems to cry actually during feeding or in the first, say, 15 or 20 minutes afterwards, that can be a sign that they've got reflux. You might see them spitting up a lot during that time. Sometimes they don't, and it's so-called silent reflux when they don't actually, they're not actually sick, but nonetheless they're getting that discomfort as the milk goes down the gullet and into the stomach. If they don't cry until more like half an hour after feeds and up to about 90 minutes after feed, so that's sort of half an hour to an hour and a half after a feed, if they seem to be really uncomfortable, then that's often a sign that there's irritability further down in the gut. And that might be to do with things that you're eating that's going through to the breast milk, or it might be to do with just their immaturity and the sensitivity of the gut. If they're not crying so much until more like a couple of hours after a feed, that's more likely to be to do with an intolerance to something like lactose, for example. So if you're eating dairy in your own diet, if you're breastfeeding, or if you're feeding a cow's milk based formula, then it can be to do with a difficulty in digesting that. So it's worth just noticing when your baby is crying in relation to feeds, because it may have something to do with that. After all, babies don't do very much other than feed and sleep, so you have to think about those things in terms of what might be causing any irritability or any reason for crying. So those would be the commonest things that we would see. Other things that can be causing a baby discomfort are actually to do with the labour and delivery process, having left some discomfort either in the head itself or elsewhere in the baby, sometimes in the shoulders, sometimes in the pelvis. And that's more difficult to spot sometimes. But you will know that if you had a long or a difficult birth, or it involved instrumental delivery or induction, things like that, then it's possible that the baby is still struggling to cope with the after effects of that. Don't worry, it'll sort itself out and it will get better. But let's talk a little bit more detail about what kinds of things you can do to try and get things better sooner rather than later. So just going back to what I've just been talking about and those discomforts in relation to the delivery, quite often what we'll see as osteopaths when we see babies that have had that kind of experience is that they're very sucky. And what they'll want to do is to suck on something all of the time. And actually what they're doing when they do that is to treat themselves, because that sucking action acts like a pump on the cranial bones. So it's like massaging the cranial bones from the inside. It's a really intelligent thing for a baby to do. However, you don't want your baby sucking either on your breast or on a bottle all the time, because then they'll just overfeed and then that will cause other problems. So this is where it can be useful for them to either suck on your finger or to suck on a dummy, to just help them do that, what's called non-nutritive sucking, which helps to ease out some of those discomforts that they might be experiencing. I'm no dummy fan for the long-term use, but these first few weeks and months, from about, it's okay to use a dummy from about 3 or 4 weeks of age. Opinions vary on that, and by all means discuss it with your health visitor as to what's the best thing to do for you. But sucking on a dummy for those few weeks can be really helpful in terms of the baby treating themselves. after a difficult birth. As far as diet goes, then it can be worth thinking about whether your own diet in terms of breastfeeding, so whether you are eating things like bananas, for example. A lot of mums find a banana a really handy thing to pack in their bag when they're going out and about, or even to have at home when you just haven't got time to make yourself a meal. But bananas have long chain molecules in them which babies' digestive systems find difficult to cope with, and actually they all have an immature and sensitive gut, and so it can be a good idea to avoid things that are complicated to digest. Bananas being one example. Brassica vegetables is another one. I once saw a baby whose mum told me that her husband was cooking their meals, which was lovely, but for some reason the only vegetable that he knew how to cook was broccoli. So she was having broccoli every night, and that was going through the breast milk and into the baby and causing colicky symptoms. So that was an easy one to solve. And the other thing that can upset a baby's digestive system is lactose and dairy intolerance. Again, often it's not like it's an allergy or something like that. It's more that it's a long chain molecule and difficult for them to digest. So obviously you don't want to be changing formulas all the time, but all of the big brands have what they call comfort formulas now, and those basically contain the enzyme lactase, which digests lactose on behalf of the baby, so they don't have to digest it themselves. And often that can be a real simple solution to those kind of problems. There are also products like CoLeaf, which can help. And again, that just contains lactase and digests the lactose for the baby. And you can also try things like Infocol or gripe water to help settle your baby's tummy. If they've got reflux, sometimes that can be quite difficult in as far as if they're spitting up all of the time. Sometimes mums get worried that their babies are not getting enough food into them, and it's worth getting weight checked regularly if you have any concerns about that, because then you can know whether they are gaining weight properly or not. Quite often, even if they're really sicky, they're still gaining weight perfectly well. However, again, there are various products on the market to help with reflux, and it's worth having a chat with the GP about that. So there's a lot of things that you can do there in terms of diet to try and make it as easy as possible for the baby to digest the milk that they're getting, whether it's your milk or whether it's formula milk. The other thing that you can do at home is just massaging the baby. Their tummy massage, go in a clockwise circular direction around the tummy, but just massaging them generally is very soothing for them, and they really enjoy that. I think similarly a bath can often be quite soothing for a baby. But as I mentioned at the beginning, they co-regulate. They need us to help them calm down. If you're with your baby, with your crying baby for hours, it can raise your heart rate, raise your stress levels, make you feel anxious, and so on and so forth. So when you then cuddle them to your chest, they will unfortunately pick up on that to some extent. If you can possibly hand them to somebody who is not currently stressed out by a baby crying, that can be really helpful. Or even just pop them down in their basket or their cot for 5 minutes. Go and make yourself a cup of tea. Have a few deep breaths and come back when your heart rate is down and you're feeling a tiny little bit less stressed. And then they will regulate to your more calm heartbeat. Or similarly, put some music on, whatever it is that helps you to relax. Listen to a meditation tape or something. It doesn't need to be much and it doesn't need to be long, just enough to calm you down and help you to re-engage with that baby in a slightly calmer state. It sounds unlikely, but honestly, it really makes a big difference to being able to calm the baby down, and yourself for that matter. It's not easy coping with a baby who is crying constantly, especially as they often do it in the evening when you're already tired at the end of a long day. And actually, that's one of the reasons why colicky symptoms tend to be worse, because in the evenings, because babies get tired too, and at the end of the day, they're often quite tired, and that raises the sensitivity level in their gut. So if you can help them to have naps during the day so that they arrive in the evening less tired, then that can be really helpful, but easier said than done sometimes. Obviously, we as osteopaths see a lot of colicky babies and refluxy babies and unsettled babies and babies with feeding difficulties and so on. And often the history does include some difficulties around the pregnancy or the birth. And that's where our skill can come in terms of helping the baby to deal with the after effects of that. So if you've tried a lot of these things that I've suggested and it's still a bit of an issue, then please do just get in touch with your local osteopath, give them a call, or when it's possible, go and see them and just see if there's anything that they can detect directly from looking at your baby as to what it is that might be causing their particular issues. Anyway, I hope this has been some help to you, and very best of luck and congratulations on your baby. And it will get easier, and it's an incredibly miraculous period of a person's life, really, this infancy. They're so extraordinary. They change so much and so quickly. I think it's just magical. And it's a shame if that period is marred by exhaustion and upset with a crying baby. So let's see if we can make it a happy time. Okay, take care.